Big John did an interview with Schmo, and it was at the Bellator event. AJ McKee fought Pitbull. Very interesting match. AJ McKee is like 16-0 now, world champion. Oh, and by the way, just won $1 million. I mean, it's a pretty good day to be AJ McKee. Set that aside. Big John does an interview with Schmo. And even though this is a Bellator event, when Big John talks, he talks MMA. And when Schmo interviews for MMA. So UFC comes up. And Schmo is looking ahead. He was talking about Derek Lewis versus Ciryl Gane. Should this be for an interim championship? This is the topic. And Big John said, you know what? This is one of the few times I disagree with the UFC as it pertains to interim titles. This is John speaking. I generally agree with those interim belts, but this one's tough for me because you got a guy out there named Francis Ngannou who's healthy. He's waiting right there, so there's no need for this match. Now, no need for this match to be for an interim title. Specifically about the title. John, no problem with the match. The interim title. So John makes a very good point, and I think that we all agree as a community that this interim belt is to identify who the number one contender is. Okay. If you follow the theory, which is what I think John was speaking to, he didn't elaborate. But I know John very well. I think I'm right when I guess John's talking about, historically speaking, you need an interim championship when you don't have a heavyweight champion who can compete. Whether he's sick or he's injured, he can't compete. Can't compete, historically speaking, is the number one reason that you bring in an interim title. But what do you do? I'm asking the question. What do you do if you have a heavyweight champion who won't compete? What do you do then? And I don't know that we were ever given clear answers by Francis Ngannou. I know that Francis's manager spoke up at one point and said he is ready to compete. He just, September. You're doing this fight in August. He needs it in September. Okay. That makes sense to an extent. But then you find out there's a little bit more to the story. And that's where the UFC speaks up and goes, now wait just a second. Yes, he is saying September, or at least he's saying later. We're not listening to that. What we're listening for is, can you fight in June? No. Can you fight in July? No. Can you fight in August? No. Okay, we're moving on. You're saying September. We're saying speed it up. You said the night you beat Stipe, you wanted fights and you wanted to stay busy. We're trying to get you fights and we're trying to keep you busy, but you're missing the date. Does it matter if you miss the date by a day? Let alone a month. I'm asking you guys a question because these fights are bound by a contract, and a contract does not care. If you are a day late, you are out of contract. So does the fact that it's 1 month make that some small period of time? I mean, it needs to be considered, right? We can't answer the question. What I'm suggesting for you is it needs to be considered. If you're the organization, you're putting on matches, and a guy is telling you no, oh, but I can do this. Well, I didn't offer you this one. I didn't offer you a fight in September. I offered you one in June. I moved it to July for you. I moved it to August. I didn't move it to September. So what I'm asking and what I'm suggesting for you guys is, what do you do in that spot? If you have a guy who isn't hurt, isn't sick, but he isn't willing, what do you do? Do you move everything to accommodate and assume that he can do it in September, or September doesn't work for you and you move it to October? Do you compromise on a date, or do you realize I have a problem? I need to learn from the lessons that have already happened to me and not have this same problem again. So I'm going to hold an interim championship, and if he's so ready by August and or September, then he should be ready by November, which is when now I'm going to call on him to fight this guy. But if he doesn't, if he does the same thing to me for the November fight that he did to me for June, July, and August, I'm ready. I will just make it for an undisputed title, and I'll take the belt off the son of a bitch. I mean, at some point, it has to get that cold. There has to be a decision maker in the room. And we've seen this where other sports where they don't have a decision maker, and largely that was never tested where they needed one. I mean, I can take you back to the NBA 2 years ago when their ratings dropped by 60%. LeBron was hurt. LeBron wasn't playing. There was other teams and coaches and general managers that decided, let's keep our stars fresh and not put them in. We've got a team. We got to play whoever we want. Let's not play the good ones. Let's save them for a different date so they're ready. And it sank the ratings by 60% because nobody could come forward and explain to an audience who had bought preseason tickets based on a schedule that the NBA put out why the players that you showed up to see are sitting on the bench. It became a problem. It was an unforeseen, but it became a problem. The NFL's never done with it. Tom Brady has never bitched out of a game because he didn't feel like it. Tom Brady never said, move it a date, give me an extra month, I haven't trained, I haven't prepared, I'm traveling, whatever the excuses were, he never offered any of them. And I'm using Tom Brady, but you could go right through the whole roster for the whole history of the NFL. They only have 16 games a year. It would be unacceptable for any of them to think they needed to rest. Well, what are you doing the other 40 months a year, 40 weeks a year, right? I mean, you see what I'm saying? But it's something that's never been tested. The players agree with me. They agree with this isn't very many. For the UFC to look at one of their fighters, let alone their champion, and go, look, I'm only calling upon you 3 times a year. If you're unwilling or you don't answer, what do they do? What do they do? What would you do in that spot? Would you hope and think that this is all going to get itself worked out? Or we say, look, I got to be ready. I've got to be ready. I've got to move on with it. Of course, I'm going to be reasonable. Of course, I'm going to listen. Of course, I'm going to move dates, particularly for a heavyweight champ. Of course I am. I'm only going to do it so many times, and then I got to get on with it. I have a whole locker full of guys with the same goals. I can't hold them up. You decide what the answer is. I'm just sharing for you that there is another question. And while maybe we haven't seen a guy outside of hurt and or sick, maybe we haven't seen unwilling before, we are seeing it now. It needs to be observed. It needs to be recognized. It doesn't need to be judged. It needs to be learned from.